Well, we are in hour number 2 of Learning the Bible in 24 Hours, in which we're going to explore the first 3 chapters of the book of Genesis, which includes the creation and the fall of man. Now, obviously the Old Testament consists of 39 books, and in our panorama of human history, as we go through the whole Bible, we'll try to keep ourselves tracked on this timeline. And of course, we're focusing on the creation and the fall of man in this particular hour. There are only 2 worldviews. There's many variations of them, but there's basically only 2 worldviews. Everything is the result of some cosmic accident. That's what our schools teach our kids, and then they wonder why there are events like Columbine High School and the rest. You teach them that they're the accidental result of some primordial goo, and then wonder why they have no sense of destiny. We either are a result of an accident, or we're the result of a deliberate design by a designer. You can't escape it. Those are the 2 possibilities. Everything else derives from that. There are 4 basic questions of life, that your answer to these questions will derive from your worldview. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? Depending on your worldview, if you think we're some kind of cosmic accident, you'll have one set of answers to that. If you recognize the reality that we're here as the result of a deliberate design, then your approach to those questions is quite distinctive. Now, what's interesting, the book of Genesis, of course, deals with this head on. And the book of Genesis also anticipates all false philosophies. You can list them all. Atheism. In contrast to the atheistic view, the book of Genesis says we were created by God. By the way, you know there are numbers you can dial for a prayer for the day. Did you know that there's a number you can dial that atheists have? You dial that number, nobody answers, you see. Okay. Sorry, I had to work that in. Pantheism says that everything is God. No. Genesis tells us that God is transcendent and distinguishable from his creation. Polytheism says there's many gods, but Genesis clearly says that there's one God. Materialism is one view, but Genesis points out that matter has a beginning, and even science has concluded that from other considerations. Humanism is the official religion of the United States, so declared by the Supreme Court. But Genesis points out God, not man, is the ultimate reality. Evolutionism, of course, is the foundation of not just our biology, but our philosophy, our psychology, our law, science, and the rest of it. God created us, and our Constitution fortunately declares that, and our Declaration of Independence does. Also, science tends to be absorbed with uniformism, that things always continue as they always have. The Bible clearly says that God chooses on his sovereignty to intervene with his creation. In fact, God not only created us, he has chosen to enter the creation and fulfill a mission on our behalf. And that's the staggering truth that the Bible embraces. All major doctrines in the Bible have their roots in Genesis: sovereign election, salvation, justification by faith, our security as believers, separation, disciplinary chastisement, the rapture of the church even, divine incarnation, death and resurrection, priesthoods, both Aaronic and Melchizedek, the Antichrist, the Palestinian covenant. All these ideas that are the main themes throughout the Scripture have their roots in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. If you understand this verse, you'll have no trouble with any other verse in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Period. New paragraph. That's the whole story. 7 words in the Hebrew. 4 times 7 letters, 28 letters. That's what it looks like in Hebrew. Remember, it goes from right to left. Bereshit bara Elohim et ha-shamayim et ha-eretz. Bereshit, in the beginning, or actually in beginning. Even the first letter, there are books written just about this verse and the shape of the letters and the implications of them. Fortunately, we'll spare you all that right now. But Bereshit, in the beginning, bara, created out of nothing. There are 3 words that can be used as create, asa and yatsa. But the asa really means to make or fashion or fabricate out of something. And yatsa really means to form. Isaiah 43:7 actually uses all three words distinctively. No, the word is bara, to create out of nothing. And the other word that deserves comment, they all deserve comment, there are volumes written just on these 7 words. But the other word that I have to call your attention is the word for God. It's Elohim. Now, you probably know enough Hebrew, whether you realize it or not, to recognize that's a plural word. Cherubim is plural of cherub. Certain kinds of nouns have an im ending to make it plural. Elohim is a plural noun. But when it's used in the Old Testament, it's used grammatically incorrectly. It's used as a singular noun. It's a plural word used as a singular noun. It's a violation of grammar, but it's a sacred one because it's a hint right there of the Trinity. A plurality, and yet one that has such unity that it's used as a singular noun. Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, period, paragraph, new subject. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved or brooded on the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were day 1, not the first day. All the rest of the days are second day, third day, fourth. This one is not the first day, it's day 1. It's a different construction. It's an absolute construction. Now, some fundamental questions that all of us stumble over as we jump into Genesis chapter 1. Is the universe approximately 15 billion years old, as astronomers tell us? Edwin Hubble decided that because of the redshift of stars, that meant that the universe is expanding, widely accepted hypothesis. In fact, that's why the Space Telescope was named after him, Hubble's law and all of that. Was it created in 6 days, in 144 hours, literally? Do we take that seriously? Or was light created in transit? It looks like it's 15 billion years old, but somehow they were just created in transit. Were the aging factors built in? Many people have a problem with that idea because it makes God a deceiver or a liar. Or were the days of Genesis simply geological eras? 6 days, but each day was 1,000 or 1,000,000 years long or something. People hold that view. And there's problems with each one of these, of course. How do we resolve it? Well, one of the things that you've, of course, heard about is the Big Bang idea. That's the commonly accepted concept of the beginning. Scientists know it. We haven't been here forever. It had to have a beginning. They call that beginning a singularity. And the Big Bang is not a single theory. It's a collection of theories. It essentially says first there was nothing and then it exploded. Sounds facetious, but that's really what it says. There are several versions of the Big Bang. The steady state model was the first one. It was Einstein's biggest mistake, by his own admission. There was a hesitation model that was refuted in the 60s. There was an oscillation model that's refuted by the entropy laws, the lack of mass and so forth. There's an inflation model that's currently in vogue, but it's starting to fall apart because it requires anti-gravity forces that have never been observed. So the Big Bang is a label for a collection of theories, none of which work. The big problem in the field of physics is trying to bend these around to try to make them fit the evidence. And, of course, none of them do. But the main event of the 20th century science is the universe is finite and can be measured. It appears to have been expanding. Apparently, it originated as a singularity in a four-dimensional space that was compressed to zero size, whatever that means. But in any case, let's move on. Now, if you take the stretch factor of this expanding universe, there's some interesting observations that suggest themselves. The universe apparently expanded by a factor of 10 to the 12th power. This comes from the measure of a quark confinement when matter freezes out energy, from some other considerations too. That's a typical expansion factor that scientists seem to have accepted. Dr. Gerald Schroeder, a world-class nuclear physicist that lives in Jerusalem, a good friend, highlights an interesting possibility. If the expansion factor is in fact approximately 10 to the 12th power, as is generally accepted, 16 billion years times 365 is approximately 6 trillion days. If you divide that by 10 to the 12th, you get 6 days. In other words, if you put an imaginary observer on the perimeter of that expansion, and you put one on the Earth, the 10 to the 12th is equal to 6 days. So it depends whose clock you're measuring. If you plug the masses of the universe and the planet Earth each into Einstein's general theory of relativity, it turns out that the 6 billion years turns out to equate, strangely, in terms of the ratio of the masses, to 6 days, which I think is provocative. That doesn't mean it's correct, it's just interesting. But there's another factor I should highlight to you, or I'd be incomplete. The second verse says, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." There's some problems, possible problems, been suggested about the Hebrew of that verse. Without form and void is tohu vabohu in the Hebrew. And the problem is suggested from Isaiah 45:18, where it says, "Thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it, he hath established it. He created it not in vain." Same word. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord and there is none else. So apparently it was originally created not in form and void, but became without form and void. In fact, the word "was" back there in verse 2 is haya, which means became. Same word is used when Lot's wife became a pillar of salt. It's a transitive verb requiring an action on the object. So from this background, some people have suggested the possibility that there's a missing interval. In the beginning, God created heaven and the earth, period. No problem. Verse 2, "But the earth became without form and void, and darkness is upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters." Now, this is the way it's rendered when the Old Testament was translated into Greek by the Hebrew experts back in the 3rd century before Christ, in the so-called Septuagint. It's an adversative, not and, but, in the Septuagint and also in the Latin Vulgate. The possibility of this interval was first suggested by Thomas Chalmers in 1814. It's supported by Pember, Barnhouse, Campbell Morgan, A. Custance, and others. It's been very controversial. Most modern scholars reject the idea. It's highly speculative, but it does tend to tie into some other passages, because one of the questions you face is, when did Satan fall? He'd already fallen by Genesis 3, and so the possibility is that's suggestive is that Satan originally ruled the planet Earth, fell, it was subject to a judgment. And what we're viewing here is the advent of man, where the earth is recreated to accommodate God's plan of redemption. And around this, of course, there's a lot of other conjectures. I won't dwell on it. Just want you, as in our survey, would be incomplete without you being aware of that. But the first quote of God starts at verse 3. God said, "Let light be," or as it's usually rendered, "Let there be light." And there was light. You know, light's one of the most puzzling aspects of physics. The speed of light is abbreviated by c as a mathematical convention. In the 17th century, Kepler, Descartes, and others, most scientists believed that light was instantaneous, that is, c was infinite. That was a common belief. But in 1677, a Dutchman by the name of Olaf Romer measured the elapsed time between the eclipses of Jupiter and one of its moons in such a way as to yield this measurement of the speed of light. He determined that light traveled at a very high but a finite speed. It was in 1729 that James Bradley confirmed Romer's work, a British astronomer. Over the last 300 years, light has been measured 164 times at least by 16 different methods. And the results of these studies are rather surprising. Barry Setterfield in Australia and Trevor Norman published some time ago some interesting observations. They took the original data as best they could get at it. In 1677, Romer, measuring the Io eclipse, measured the speed of light as 307,600 kilometers per second with a band of accuracy of plus or minus a little over 5,000 kilometers per second. That was the first measurement. In 1875 at Harvard, using essentially the same method, or approach at least, they measured the speed of light more accurately, measured at 299,921 kilometers per second with an error band of about 13 kilometers plus or minus kilometers per second. In 1983, the National Bureau of Standards, using a laser technique, measured the speed of light as 299,792 plus or minus 0.00003 kilometers per second. As the centuries go by, the accuracy, of course, is improving due to better technology. But here's the surprising thing if you look at that more closely. The means of those measurements don't even overlap. In other words, Romer is either awfully in error, or the speed of light's been slowing down. Barry Setterfield and Trevor Norman published the possibility that the speed of light is not a constant, but has been slowing down, as a very, very provocative conjecture over 10 years ago. And there's an uproar in physics saying those guys are crazy. Now today we smile at that because they've now discovered all kinds of reasons why the speed of light is not a constant, apparently.